lot of the companies that move here for GM, so they need a lot of room when they come in. And then we've also done real well with the complex that's over in Riverside for the industrial place.
A couple of introductions, and I am not Melissa Clark. I'm John Latenzer. I am pinch hitting for Melissa, who's got a little bit of a flu bug and can't be here, and if she's got a flu bug, we're kind of glad that she's So I'm John Latenzer. I'm on the board, and glad to pinch hit this morning. We have, of course, we're thankful to the good folks at Central Solution and the Osgood family for hosting us. I'll give Paul a chance to say a few things here in just a minute. As we get started, a couple of quick introductions. I'd like, we have Mayor, newly elected Mayor David Howdy with us today. We also have our at-large commissioner from the Unified Government. Commissioner Melissa Bynum is with us today. The commissioner is one of our two voices on the commission of Unified Government, has been very active, and does help us quite a bit there. We're always glad to have, certainly glad to have the mayor and the commissioner here with us today. One unique thing, we're going to kind of get back to videotaping our meetings so we can post these, especially the speaker portion of our meeting. So a special thanks to the good folks at Blackjack Tire, who are new members of the organization, and Sarah, who's managing the camera. So for half of you, we'll have your face on the video of this meeting. The other half, it'll be the back of your head. But either way, thanks again, Sarah, for doing this. We have a couple just little announcements. We'll do a little bit of Fairfax business. We'll let Paul Nomberger say a couple quick things, and we'll get to our speaker. We've got a great topic today, the B-25 History Project, which you all know, and we'll learn so much more about the B-25 bomber that was built here at Fairfax years ago. So a couple of quick announcements. You all came in today in the parking lot and across the sidewalk, which is some new work that was done as part of the CMIP project. A partnership between the Fairfax Association and the Unified Government to split off a little bit of money and continue to update curbs and sidewalks in the neighborhood. So it's just ironic that we're here today and some work is just finishing on a good stretch of fiberglass road just right outside this building. We're in the budget for some more of that work. We're trying to nudge that budget up just a little bit. And, we have a couple $100,000, but it sounds like a little bit until you see that that isn't very many blocks of concrete curb and new sidewalk. But it's third year of that, so we're glad to continue that. On the website and on a news to use bulletin that Melissa would have sent out the last few days, there's going to be a kind of a pre-planning meeting for a Fairfax master plan. We're looking for people who would be part of that. So we're going to meet next week, Tuesday, the 13th in the afternoon. We're planning now to do it at Melissa's business, which is CE Distribution around the corner. If it turns out that there's going to be a little more involvement there, we may shift that to a little bit bigger room. But for now, you can plan. Anybody who'd like to be part of that, we'd love to have you as a chance to have some input for a master plan for Fairfax, and we're talking about continuing to update curbs and sidewalks, some signage, maybe some different street lighting, but enhancements to the neighborhood. So there'd be some input towards that master plan and some ideas that we can put together to kind of keep the neighborhood improving and to keep our lookout. So many good things going on in Fairfax. The momentum is all to the good side, and this would be another thing to help after that. The next couple of luncheons, we'll continue to have a great list of speakers who come to our group. Wyandotte County District Attorney Mark Dupree will be our speaker next month. If anybody's heard the District Attorney Mark speak, you realize he gives a terrific talk, full of energy, full of great ideas. He's really an interesting guy to hear, and he will be with us in March. Mayor Alvey has agreed to be with us in April, and he'll be speaking at that meeting. We don't have those locations pinned down. We always try to be in the Fairfax area as much as we can. I'll let you know which location they are, but that's just a sneak peek at the speakers that are coming in the next couple of months. Our biggest event of the year is always the Fairfax Festival. It'll be on again this fall. There are opportunities for sponsorships. Like any volunteer organization, we're always looking for more volunteers. There's plenty of information on the website, and you will probably hear about this every luncheon from now until the festival. A couple of them, they have been very successful, and we hope to continue that. So think about if your business can be a sponsor for that or not. There's different levels of sponsorship available. All of those would be welcome. I think with that, I'm going to turn it to Paul and let him tell a little bit about his company and all, and continue to eat and finish that up, and we'll keep the program going.
Thanks, John. And frankly, the B25 is a much more interesting topic than me talking, so I'll move very, very fast. A lot of familiar faces. It's great to see all of you again, and some new faces as well. So I'll be repetitive and just give a little background on Central Solutions. We were started by my grandfather. It's a family business. He was an immigrant from a small little Portuguese island called Madeira, which is between the Canaries and the Azores. In fact, if you look at that back wall, there's an image there. That's a small little fishing village, not far from the capital. You'll notice there's no beaches. It's all volcanic. It's a beautiful island. He immigrated over. One of his siblings came over not long thereafter. Two of his brothers stayed on the island, so they, of course, had children and grandchildren. And we go back and forth on social media with them. They visited here. We go back there. It's really a lot of fun. He worked for many, many years. Gradually, my father took over, and then he decided he liked sales more than running a company, so my older siblings took over the company with my dad's blessing, and he continued to do sales. That was back in the late 70s. I joined in the early 90s, and now we have the fourth generation firmly entrenched and more in the pipeline. So we're like a bad cold, you can't get rid of us. Real quick, I'll just introduce my brother Mike, my brother Mark. There you go. Mike says he's the only one that doesn't color his hair. He's the honest one. And then Chris back there, wave Chris. So the four siblings, and then the next generation, David right here, and then Henry there towards the back. So we're very glad to have you all with us. We have some fabulous parting gifts. Don't leave without that little bottle of shampoo in front of you. It's one of our newer offerings. We are an EPA and FDA manufacturer of skincare and infection control products, shampoos, hand sanitizers, antimicrobial soaps, skin protectants, surgical instrument reprocessing liquids, that sort of thing. The healthcare market, predominantly human health. We do some animal health as well. So feel free to take that one with you. And I know that there are some people that have asked me about our recovery cream, which we've given out in the past, little 2-ounce tubes. Those are available on the way out. If you go by the receptionist desk, you'll see some tubes sticking up, and feel free to grab one on your way out. So that being said, that's a little bit about us. My family and I will be sticking around for a while. So if you have questions, we'd love to answer them. We'd also like to meet you. If you're new to these meetings or new to the Fairfax Industrial Association, we'd really like to meet you and talk to you about why we love having your support. So thank you for being here. That being said, I will turn it back over to John. But again, a real honor to have you and to be hosting this. So many thanks. John?
And thanks to all the Navarga brothers, even those who don't color their hair. Well, as you all know, our speaker today is Dan Dillon. He's speaking to the topic of the B-25 Bomber History Program, and I'm going to let him tell his story because he can do it better than I can introduce that. So let's welcome Dan Desco, please.
I'm happy with this. Okay, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I'm Dan Desco. Founder, CEO of the B25 History Project. That's my official title. I gave it to myself. That's how it works, right? So basically, how many people knew B25s were built here in Fairfax? It's not bad. Better than last time. I was in front of a group of about 1,800 high school kids in Independence. I had 4 people raise their hands. One of them was the history teacher. So, well, I'm not used to seeing so many hands, but hey, this is Fairfax. It's pretty good. I brought my short program with me, so for the next 8 hours, you'll enjoy it. This is actually the program that I give actually in the high schools and stuff like that. So I'm going to step over here because what you care about is over there, not over here. First thing, there's a doctor in front of my name, but I don't want to confuse people. It has absolutely nothing to do with history. When I went to school, I didn't give a darn about history. So why do I call myself a historian? Well, I have to define what a historian is. You have to study history. You have to preserve history. You have to specialize in something. You can't know everything about everything. And I'm laser focused on one particular topic that just happens to used to be done right over there. So I think it's important that I teach what I learn. I'm doing this right now. And I must explain without distorting the facts. Now, I'd like to say that B-25 was the best plane on the face of the planet. And it was, so I don't have to distort that. But I have to tell the truth, and there's some good things, there's some bad things. There were great things that happened here in Kansas City, and absolutely nobody knows it. So that's what I'm doing. Since I give this to kids, I'd like to point out that Wikipedia and Arcadia books are not valid resources, just so you know. So my focus basically is all about the B-25, the Fairfax plant. But without an airport, you can't have a plant. Where's the airport, everybody asks? Well, GM built a building right smack in the middle of it. If you actually Google an image, do an image search on the Fairfax GM plant, and you see a picture of it, you can see that there's what looks like roads kind of sticking out the corners of it. Well, that's the old airport. There's still parts of the runway that are still there today. But it was actually located, for all of you that don't know a little history of the area, the Goose Island River Bend. That's what that is over there. In 1921, the first known use as an airport was an air meet, as they were called back then. Basically, it's kind of what we would call a fly-in today. It was Swinney Airport, purchased by the Wood brothers. August 4th, 1929, it became Fairfax Airport. The rest is history. So the Naval Reserves actually established a training station there. In 1935 and 1937, they brought in all their Navy and Marine squadrons, actually started a training program there. Now, that had to leave by 1942. They moved it out to the Olathe Naval Air Station, otherwise known as Gardner Airport. So it's still around. They just moved it over there. December 7th, 1940, exactly 1 year prior to Pearl Harbor, they announced they were going to build a factory here to build B-25s. Just some details about it. It's going to be government owned. Basically, the government would pay for the factory and the building and so on and so forth. And then North American Aviation would run it. Kansas City ended up buying the airport from the people that owned it at the time, so it became a public airport. This picture is actually a little bit later, but it's a great picture of the plant. It was a blackout building, no windows, doors were all covered, so you couldn't see any light even at night. It could be darkened completely. It was a really big building, and interestingly enough, it did not have to be camouflaged like so many other plants, because above 500 feet, it looked like a parking lot. And if you look at the roof, you can kind of see that. Over 500 feet, you can't tell it's even there. So obviously, you'd have to be more than 500 feet to bomb it, so they felt pretty safe. Just kind of the little general terms of who built it, how they built it, so on and so forth. Essentially, we use local contractors, we use contractors from other states, but most of the work was completed by the Army Corps of Engineers. Well, that picture doesn't quite look right. If you're going to put that picture in a newspaper, it's just really not going to work real well because you have no idea who that people are. So, that's better. We got their hats off. We got the cute little kid in the front. We're good. All right. So here's what we're going to put in the newspaper. We're going to call this our dedication. Governor Payne Radner, Major A.M. Nielsen, and Kinneberger. Kinneberger obviously was the president of North American Aviation at the time. Nielsen was a commander in the armed forces. He was in charge of the Army portion of the plant. And that was on March 8th, 1941. Things are going to move quickly from now on. Kinderberger Road still exists to this day. You guys know it, but notice what's different about the sign? Somewhere along the way, I think, after the flood of 51, when they hung the Kinderberger Road signs back up, they misspelled it. You'll look, you'll notice it. It's spelled wrong. Anyways, it still exists today, albeit misspelled, but that's how it's supposed to be spelled. Construction started on March 11th, just a couple days after they broke ground. Basically, it was swampland at the time. And so you can't really plant a good building on top of it, as many of you well know, so they built it on piers. So they flattened the land off, put in all the piers. By April, they were putting in structural steel to build the building. And this is pretty fast for such a large building, especially in the time. By July, it kind of looked about like this. We had all the structural steel completed. They were still working on pouring the concrete and so on and so forth. This picture was actually taken in the last part of September. This picture was taken by a local newspaper to run, I think it ran on September 7th, 1941. So this would have been at the end of September when that was taken. So still, as you can see, there's still a bit of work to do, but there's a building there. You'll notice that's not the factory. That's actually Inglewood, California. The first 53 men to work here at the factory were all sent from Inglewood. I do have that list of them. Here's the breakdown of what they did. And you'll notice we had 8 educators, 8 people just to come teach us how to do what we needed to do. And they were the ones that started the first programs, the first training programs. There's the first gentleman that was hired from the area to work at the plant. I do have a picture of his face, but this one's much better because it actually shows him doing what he's doing. His name was James F. Bryant. He was a local guy who was hired on as a jig welder. Jigs are basically same thing today, basically what you create so that you can build a plane on it, kind of a template to hold everything in place. And he's working on old number 1, which is the first jig that was built. This picture was taken probably late July, actually, but he started working on July 8th of 1941. So the plant was done enough, but they started working on the insides by July. The first woman to work at the plant, her name to be hired for the plant was Laura May Paget. I like this story because she later on married the first man. So the first man and the first woman hired at the plant both got married later on. Kind of an interesting thing. Don't have a picture of her, but hopefully we'll find one soon. The first women that worked at the plant, actually, these are going to be what technically considered the first Rosies, so these are the first people working in production. They started working on January 19th. There's the 9 women. There's their names. I do have pictures of all 9 of them. They were known at the time as the Nifty 9. Yes, this was 1940. The funny thing is I've got all of the manuals, well, a lot of the manuals from the plants, and this particular picture came from the employee handbook. And there's one sentence in there determining the dress code for men, and there are 3 pages telling women what they can wear, along with this picture here. It basically said, men can wear whatever they want, but women, here's what you shouldn't wear, and here's what you should wear, and why. 10 rules on 3 pages of what you should wear, but things have changed a little bit nowadays. So let's jump back just a little bit. Now we talk about the people, we talk about the plant. So originally it was designed as an assembly center. We were not going to manufacture anything here. We're basically just going to put it together. The first 100 planes that they put together here in Kansas City actually came from Inglewood. They started out in big pieces. The first 3 actually were in major assembly form. So they were basically just big chunks we had to bolt together. As that number got further and further down the line, the pieces got smaller and smaller until they were finally just shipping as parts. The first parts started arriving in late June of 1941. And the first, actually that says late November 41, but actually I do have the date now. They actually started the first aircraft here at Fairfax in the first week of November of 1941. So March, we start building the building. By November, we're actually working on building an airplane. There's Georgia Von Svetlich. She was the first lead woman, so she was the first woman that actually made supervisor at the plant. And she was an assistant foreman in 1942, and she became the first female foreman in May 16th of 1943. So that's kind of a long way for women back in the day. We were going to build B-25D. It's interesting that it's absolutely identical to a C. I know you guys don't care too much, but this is kind of the stuff I talk about. If you see an airplane, the only way to tell the difference between a C and a D is to look at the serial number on it. If you don't have a serial number visible, there's absolutely no way to tell the difference. Absolutely identical. Early on. Now, they did quit making C's before they quit making D's, so some of the D's did have some changes to them later. We built 2,290 of them between December of 1941 through March of 1944. That's just a D model. I love this picture because this is where I get my lecture on distorting the facts. So this picture was taken on December 8th, 1941. And I saw an author who posted this picture one time, and he gave this big talk about how these people were so patriotic after Pearl Harbor, and they just had to go down and support their country. And well, this picture was taken in the morning, and the way news was traveling and stuff like that. Some of these people probably didn't even know. This was an everyday occurrence outside the plant. The average person at that time made about 50 cents an hour. And if you got a job at this plant in a skilled job, so that basically meant you had to do some training, you could make $1.50 an hour. So 3 times the prevailing wage. And on top of that, you had full insurance coverage. You had dental. You had they had an on-site facility where you could have minor surgeries performed and stuff like that. Yeah, this was the job to have, and coming out of the recession, people wanted it. So that's the real reason for this. But it does make it does make for a great picture of the plant. Okay, so we completed our first B-25, 122341. That's her right there. Her name's Miss Greater Kansas City. That is Miss Thomas Bender. Thomas Bender was the first person that was hired for the assembly line. So he was the first person to start putting planes together. That's his wife right there that christened the first airplane. Now, Miss Greater Kansas City was used as a trainer. And she basically spent the entirety of the war stateside, basically in Colorado. Her first test flight was on January 3rd, so we took a little bit of time off after we smacked her with a bottle of champagne. So there was nobody in Kansas City that knew how to fly a B-25. We'd never built one, we'd never had one, we didn't know, so we had to bring in a pilot from California to come over and fly her, which we did. Pilot Balfour, Pilot Paul Balfour. Trying to talk too fast, it's a long presentation. And Jim Bradley was a co-pilot. Jim Bradley was not actually a pilot, he was an engineer. But at the time, it was not required that you be a pilot to fly an airplane, believe it or not. She was accepted by the U.S. Army on February 17, 1942. They took her up to Wright-Patterson, did some more tests on her to make sure we knew how to put them together. And then we took her over to La Junta. She spent the entire war as a trainer and was finally scrapped at the end of the war in 1945. This is an image I'm sure all of you have probably seen. It's an absolutely beautiful thing. We did not paint the airplanes yellow. That's actually zinc chromate, so it's a preservative. We got smart. The average lifespan of a B-25 during the war was about a month. They're not going to corrode, so we quit wasting the time, the money on putting the corrosion protection on them. But a lot of people like to point out that only 11 bombers were accepted in the first 4 months of 1942. You know, these guys didn't know how to build planes. It took them that long. They're only building, one every. No, that's not true. We couldn't get the parts in here. At the time, there are a certain number of screws that hold the engines on them, for example, and they had something on a ramp. They would go pull screws off of so that they could bolt another engine on and get it out the door. They had serious issues supplying, the suppliers had serious issues supplying both California and Kansas City of the same parts. So we knew we had to do something to fix that, and we weren't really too sure at the time what to do, so we kind of did the best we could with what we had. And we finished as many planes as we could. Along came a little bit of a solution in kind of a roundabout way. So North American was given a contract to build B-29s. They were given this contract in February of 1942, and the Fairfax plant was supposed to do that. So they started the design phase to expand the size of the plant so that it could accept that B-29's a big airplane. So they were going to build B-25s and B-29s side by side here in Fairfax. So they had a little bit of an issue, and that little bit of an issue happened on April 18th. Everybody know about the Doolittle raid? So we took 18, well actually technically 24 B-25s, put 16 of them on an aircraft carrier, and carried them on over, and that was basically our first attack. So that's the revenge for Pearl Harbor happens here. We didn't do a lot of damage with 16 airplanes, but what we did do is, number one, we proved we could. Number two, it forced the Japanese who thought their land couldn't be attacked to bring their forces back and protect their homeland, which took forces out of the other fields of battle. And it also, they were convinced that the bombers came from Midway. So they started planning to attack Midway so that it would never happen again. That was a big mistake. So essentially, the Doolittle raid set up the situation that eventually caused us to turn the tide of the war, which was Midway. Thank you, Mr. Doolittle. But because of that, quite quickly, people realized that the B-25 was kind of an important thing. We took an airplane that wasn't designed to fly off an aircraft carrier, we did it anyway, and we did it quite well. And we could have done it better. So, what are we going to do about that? Well, we're going to cancel that B-29 contract because we want more of these things. Because we know what they can do. So they canceled the B-29 contract, but they said, look, we can't build enough of these aircraft. We've already shown that we have supply issues. So they allowed the expansion of the plant to occur, which gave us the high bay, which everybody's familiar with. They canceled the contract for the B-29, and they created a new contract for some more B-25s. So the construction started, and then we started doing some manufacturing here. So we actually started making parts here in Fairfax in order to build B-25s. Lucky number 13, unlucky number 13, depending on your perspective, I guess. The 13th plane built is the only loss of life test flight incident in Fairfax history. So the 13th plane we built had suffered an engine loss on takeoff. After that, it was essentially pilot error that caused her to go down, because you can't fly a B-25 on one engine. All 5 on board were lost. That is a picture, actually, that was in the newspaper of the plane. You can tell that it's pretty much unrecognizable. Eventually, one of these years, we'll probably find that, but I'm guessing that's under the Broadway extension, actually. So that was the only time that we ever lost a life on a test flight. There were a few other planes that crashed, a few other instances where people had to bail out due to issues, but this is the only time where a fatality occurred. This is the high bay everybody's familiar with. So we started working as an assembly setting, doing absolutely no manufacturing, and by this time, which is now 1943, the manufacturing had increased to 60% of the plane was actually manufactured here and then assembled. So the entire original plant was turned into the manufacturing and subassembly. The Leeds plant was basically used for a staging area for the plant parts that came in from Memphis and other places. There were some that still came in from California. And the in-ground rail system, and this is kind of like the typical picture that everybody sees. Most of the pictures you see if you Google online will be of the high bay, because it's such a really neat area. So here's basically the factory plan. This is basically the way it looked back in the day. And you can see how the assembly line worked all the way through the sub-assembly, manufacturing at the top, sub-assembly in the middle, and then the final assembly down at the bottom. And then you see these planes turn the opposite direction over here in that diagonal. That's the armament hangar, and there's some really neat photos. I'll show you one here in a bit. North American was known for its conveyor system, where they basically built parts in one place and used a conveyor system to deliver those parts as they were needed. This is a great shot of that. I'd like to throw in here, Virginia Robinson is a lady that I met. She has since passed, but she was one of the crane operators. She happened to be one of our Rosies. But that would have been her view. That would have been basically what she did, what she saw, and how she did it. This is actually the empennage, part of the tail section that comes down. You can see a gentleman, I think that's a gentleman anyway, down there in this particular case. Just again, as they come through the assembly line, that's, you see how they're so close together. This is before they get their wingtips. So we started building planes really quickly. At our peak, we built over 300 airplanes in 1 month. And that's kind of amazing when you think about that. There's no computers, just a bunch of slide rules and pencils. We did win an E award that was presented on October 6th, 1944. That's a picture of the presentation of the flag. We actually have in our archive one of the one of the pamphlets from the day that lets us know who did what and when and where. This is the 30,000th, also delivered that day, was the 30,000th North American aviation-built airplane. Just happened to be a B-25, and happened to be that B-25 right there. Back when I was telling you, notice we don't have any paint or anything on there. This is why. She was delivered on October 6th, 1944, basically. It took a while to get her overseas to where she was going. I mean, it takes a while to fly, you know, an aircraft from around the world, basically. But, so she made it to her base on January 13th, and she crashed on January 29th. Not unusual. What is kind of unusual is she was coming in for a landing, and they had a whole fleet of B-25s that were coming in. The B-25 that landed in front of this one, as it was in approach, lost a landing gear, lost one of their gear on the runway. And so they were actually about to land, so they full throttled it, pulled it back so that they wouldn't hit that B-25. Radial engines don't like that, and both of them went kaput. And so they ended up crashing their plane, trying not to crash into another plane. But that stuff happened all the time, unfortunately. I love this picture right here. By late 1945, or late 1944, early 1945, we were building them so fast that most of them were going straight to storage, which is an important factor here. I'll mention again here in a little bit. But I like this picture here because you'll note it's widely publicized that the plant was segregated, and a lot of people, there was a lot of really nasty things said by Kindleberger that are just not appropriate by today's standards, but kind of expected back then. But it wasn't as segregated as you think. So Kindleberger said, we've got plenty of room in the janitor's department for African Americans, and well, that wasn't the word he used, but that's the word I'm going to use. But you'll notice they're not all African Americans. They weren't. African Americans worked in every single department in the plant. They worked in skilled jobs, they worked in unskilled jobs, they worked right next to everybody else. It was 1940-something. It wasn't always a great situation, but they did. And they succeeded. The first African American gentleman that I know of that did a skilled job worked on the assembly line in by May of 1942. Which that's pretty early in the war, actually. So March of 1945, we're building so many B-25s, they're actually cutting ships because we don't need as many, and we're coming to the end of our contract. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to build the P-80, which was actually the United States' first jet-powered fighter. We were going to build it here. They brought in two, this one, all put together, and another one in pieces so that they could study it, figure out how to make it work. And they built what they called a pig pen, basically just a big wall. They didn't let anybody see. They started studying it, building jigs, and so on and so forth. And that was in March of 1945. A few details of the contract were released because, as we know, a couple months later, we have the E-Day. So Germany surrendered. Well, we don't need these airplanes anymore, do we? So they canceled the P-80 contract. So the minute they canceled the P-80 contract, just a couple weeks later, in May 25th, there's a picture of the P-80 in pieces inside the plant. They basically made available to other industries a big chunk of the plant. So they laid off a lot of people. Again, we don't need so many B-25s. We've got thousands of them in storage now. Not too much longer than that was VJ Day. Germany finally surrenders. Now, it's important that there are, I point this out to the kids, there's actually two VJ Days. The 15th was when the surrender was announced. And of course it wasn't signed until later. The important one for history here is the 15th. Because on the 15th, everybody went to work and they were told to go home. Drop your tools and go home. You can't take anything with you, just go home. Don't call us, we'll call you. Even though the formal surrender wouldn't take place until September 2nd, everybody, when they went home, got a letter on the 20th that said, sorry, you don't have a job anymore. But the largest layoff of the plant history, they laid off everybody, pretty much, with the exception of a little over 2,000 people. There's a smattering of them standing in front of the very last B-25 right there. So, here's a breakdown. So at that point, when the contract was terminated, there were 72 aircraft that had engines on them, but were not complete. So on August 20th, there was a group of people that went back to work and completed those 72 aircrafts. They would not be complete by contract because they were not allowed to arm them, and the contracts would require them to be armed. So they were incomplete but fully flyable. So we completed them, and the last one was completed on October 15, 1945, when this photograph was taken, and there was a whole series of photographs. 15 days later, actually I guess 16 days later, on October 31st, 1945, she was flown to storage, and she would be the last one. So it was in operation from November of 41 to October 45, 47 months. 59,337 employees. We built 6,680 B-25s. We produced more medium bombers than any other plant in the world during World War II, right over there. 2/3 of all of the B-25s ever built were built right over there. The sad thing is, if you go online right now into World War II aviation chat group and ask everybody where the B-25 was built, they'll tell you California, and they'll be wrong. So everybody always asks, how many still survive? I've got a list of just over, actually, 150 airframes. 130 of those airframes were built here in Kansas City. So the overwhelming majority of what is left was built here in Kansas City. That's because of that production surplus. There were so many brand new ones sitting in storage facilities all over the U.S., we didn't bother to bring any of them back home from war. So all of those went away, and the only ones in storage were ours. There's about 37 actively flying, and there's only 2 of those that are actively flying right now, and they're restoring a 3rd one. So there's only 2 of those that weren't built in Kansas City. So of the 40-ish that are actively flying right now, there's only 2 of them that weren't built in Kansas City. There's at least 10 others, actually, honestly, probably more than that, that could return to fly if you have more money than brains. Because it's actually a little over $2,000 an hour to fly a B-25. By the time you calculate all of your costs. Most of them are on static display. One of my favorite pictures of the Axis Nightmare, she actually is one of the flying B-25s to this day. Fairfax Ghost, how many people know the Ghost? That was my first love right there, and won't tell my wife. But so we'll go back to this little history here. So we did have a B-25 here in Kansas City once upon a time, extremely appropriately, all the way up until the day that Fairfax closed. So March 31st, 1985 was the day they closed the Fairfax airport. So what was supposed to happen was they were going to do a ceremonial last flight. The B-25 went up. They throw this nice little wreath out with some nice little words on it onto the field. Come back, refuel, and sit around until midnight. And just at midnight, she would take off again, and she'd be the last B-25 out, or the last airplane out. So quite appropriately, it would be a B-25. Little problem with that. When she came back to refuel, her nose gear didn't indicate as being locked. There was a malfunction in the mechanism that actually triggered the sensor. Now, her nose gear was down and locked, but you don't know that. You can't land at that point at this airport because the airport's about to close. So if you do lose a gear, you're going to not fix the airplane and fly it out. You're going to tear the airplane apart and truck it out. So they went to their new home and to risk a landing out there, and landed just fine. And come to find out, the landing gear had locked down, but there's a little mechanism that hits a little solenoid in there, and it didn't quite reach. So the last flight was a Cessna 402, very dramatically, unfortunately. So November 5th, 1945, I told you the last plane flew out of the Fairfax plant in October 31st. 6 days later, 5 days later, GM took over the plant. And they had it all the way up until May 8th of 1987 when they closed the plant. While they were tearing it down, of course we all know there was a fire that they just pretty much demolished whatever was left. That's a picture that was taken in the mid-90s. You can kind of see off the corners, you can see a little bit of the taxiway, you can see a little bit of the runways. For all the people that aren't paying attention, that's where the plant used to be. You can see there's still a lot of the parking lot there, and that's pretty much how it remained all the way up until just a few years ago. So, Fairfax Bomber Plant today. Now I get to talk about my friend Spencer over here. Thank you. So, Basically, when GM was taken over by the government said, hey, you got a lot of dirt laying around, not just here, but all over the United States. So they were forced to auction off a lot of their extra land. And this land over here was one of those that went up for sale, and it was purchased by a company that then started developing it. As it just so happens, we always keep an eye on things over here, and we were driving down, we realized there was a company that was building right where the employee gates were. And the picture on the right is those gates just a few years ago before we got them. The picture on the left is those gates back in 1942. So this is the employee entrance, basically. It's not the one that the VIPs go through. This is where your average guy is driving through the plant. And so we went to Craft Tank and we sent them a little email, and so we said, well, we know you're going to tear it down, so can we have it? And I was expecting a big, long, drawn-out explanation. No, it was a, yeah, sure, no problem. Do you want us to deliver it? What else do you want? Okay then, so we ended up getting the employee gate and 4 gate posts so that we actually have enough material that we can actually reassemble it. And the theory is, well, we will eventually. We actually had a plan at the time to do it that fell through, but we will actually restore those at some point and put them back up to honor the people that drove in and out of those gates every day, all 59,337 of them. I think they deserve it. That's just me. So that's where I come in, B25 History Project. There's a really long story about how I got to doing what I'm doing. I'll tell you a little bit of it here. That is our mission statement. We take that to heart every single day, or I know I do. We work on everything. We do everything. If it's B25 related, last year was the 75th anniversary of the Doolittle Raid. I flew all over the United States just to visit with B25s, to get to know them, see if there's anything we can do for them. I'm working with several people that are restoring B25s and getting the history that they need to do their job better. With our digital archives, we have more information than most everybody else. That's me. I'm a pharmacist by trade. But this is what I'd rather be doing. Show me. That's my second love. Eventually I'll get to my wife, I think. But, so basically this is how I got started. So my grandparents actually worked at the plant, and they built B-25s. My grandmother was an inspector. My grandfather operated a punch press. No, that's not where they met. They knew each other before then. But they started an organization called the NAAK B-25 Bomber Builders Newsletter, basically just to keep former employees together. I helped them with that. I basically was their computer geek for a while. To be real honest, didn't give a darn about the history or anything when I was doing all that. But eventually you cannot be involved with this and just not get addicted to it. So I'm warning you now. But so we sent a quarterly newsletter out to over 900 people that used to work at the plant. Both of my grandparents have since passed. I took a couple of years off to have my own personal little nervous breakdown because 2 very important people in my life had passed. But I jumped back on the bandwagon and decided that I would not let any of their work die. Currently, I'm on the board of trustees for the Wyandotte County Historical Society, which is an extremely appropriate place. They have tons of stuff out there that we're working on and working with, getting more display of somehow. That's my grandfather there on the right. That is actually out at the museum. That is a 5,000-pound rock out there. Looks a little worse today than it did then, but you know, it was brand new back then. But it's listed on the National Historical Markers list. I'm pretty proud of that. I designed that memorial. It actually had more going to it, but you know, it's all about money. And, our smallest donation for that monument was $2.50, and our largest donation was $500. It took quite a lot of people to put that together, but I'm proud of it. The other thing that we did, that's a vertical tail and rudder assembly off of B-25. It was restored by the gentleman on the far right. The guy in the middle is my grandfather again. The guy on the left actually wrote a couple little books, George Bauer. We actually acquired that. It was, and Jim restored it, and then we brought it to a reunion and there's a little over 100 signatures of people that worked at the plant. That is now on permanent display out at the Wyandotte County Museum as well. B25history.org, that's my web. This is old information, but that's my website. We had This is averages over 36,000 hits per month. We're over 100,000 hits per month now. It's going up so fast, so that's a good thing. Everything you want to know is there. I'm still building it, and trust me, it's going to be huge when I'm done, because the more I build it, the more I want to put on it. But that's just the way I work. There's lots of really cool stories on there. I could talk for the next 8 hours on it. That's my grandfather, Harmonica Harry. That was his name in the plant. That's him in his, in basically his work uniform. So this was taken in the fall of 1942. That's my grandmother. Send them back, Alice. She was picky. She was picky. A couple other people here that are still alive. Mary White is my newly adopted grandmother. She's a wonderful person. That's Dee, her husband. She's still around and with us. Alice Bott, still around a bit with us. You might have, for all the people who have watched the news, she was actually on the news about 6 or 8 months ago or something like that. She's still making blankets for Children's Mercy. So she's just always been given to the community. She's 96 now. My favorite picture of a B-25 is this right here. It was taken in 1944 at the pit. The pit was basically a big box with a bunch of sand in it. Every single weapon, every single gun that was put on a B-25 was test fired. That's how they did it. Yes, they test fired them 24/7, 365. That's not staged. They just walked up and took some pictures. They did this in the middle of the night. Aren't you glad you didn't live down here then? Anyway, it's pretty. Every third round was a tracer, which is why it looks so nice. But there was 2 or 3 photo shoots that were done with these photographs, and they're all awesome. Questions? I know there's a million questions that we could probably last the next 12 hours on.
Of the 16 planes,
Yes.
the Doolittle Ray, how
Yep.
many were there?
Absolutely none. So the Doolittle Ray, we knew we were going to lose the planes. They had no intentions on bringing them back. They were actually B models that were built in California. We were already building C's and about to start building D's. Well, actually, I guess we were building D's at that time too. So that was old, out-of-date, nasty things. The United States never used, the U.S. never used a B model in combat, with the exception of the Doolittle Ray. They were all either used as trainers or they were part of the Lend-Lease program. They had no armament, and about half the guns. It flew faster, but it was not as good of an airplane as the newer ones were. Anything else? It depends, actually. So pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and then typically you had 2 people in the back, engineer gunners in the back. So typically 5. The B-25H didn't have a co-pilot. So G's didn't have co-pilots. I'm sorry, I'm lying to you. H's did. They brought them back. They were kind of handy. Any other questions? Yeah.
How many of these did we lose in World War II?
How many did you lose in World War II? Well, combat losses, essentially most of them, quite honestly, because at the end of the war, there was a bunch we didn't bring back, so if you factor those back in. Out of the just shy of 10,000, I'm going to say probably about 6,000, 7,000 by the end of the war. Yeah. It was a great plane, but it was shot at a lot. They were at every theater of the war. They were completely versatile. There's different modifications that were done out in the field. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff, that we can talk about. Everybody loved to fly them. They were actually overpowered at the time. Anybody that's ever flown them says it flies like a fighter, but it's a bomber. And that is indeed a true statement, which got more than one pilot into a heap of trouble. Yeah, one in particular, actually, they were doing some tests on one with a more powerful engine, and he actually overflew the airplane and it fell apart in midair. Don't do that. Yeah?
Did they do well in dogfights?
Well, not
Or did
really.
they really get into them?
No, you're not going to get into. You don't like to get into those kind of situations. But I will say that although you hear about all bombers always being escorted by fighters, these weren't. Very rarely will you ever see a B-25 in anything being escorted by a fighter. There was just no need. They were just too. By the J model that had let's see, if you put a strafer, there's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 50 caliber machine guns on it. I don't think you really need a fighter. Anything else?
And who all flew those? At that time, it was like the Army Air Corps?
It was the Army Air, we did not have an Air Force until after the war. It was the Army Air Force. They were Army pilots. There were about 800 that were delivered to the Navy. Those were technically called PBJs, PBJ-1, whatevers. Those were Navy planes. There's only one PBJ still remaining, and that's MB-11 out in California, which is a great segue. Last year was the 75th anniversary of the Doolittle raid, and I was honored. They had 11 B-25s that flew over the Dayton Air Force Museum, and a good friend of mine who just happens to be a Doolittle Raider, Dick Cole, was there. And so they flew 11 B-25s over, and one of which was the PBJ MB-11, and I was flying in that airplane at the time, sitting in the nose going, "Hi, Dick." So if you see any video of that flyover, look for me going, "Hi." It was a great flight, yeah?
I've always heard that the General Motors plant was here before, I guess, and
Nope.
was converted, and you're saying differently. When was General Motors' presence then here in Fairfax, and did they go into the old plant?
It depends, yes, so there's a technicality here. So during the war, General Motors actually owned a big chunk of North America. So the high bay and stuff like that, that was actually designed by General Motors. It was purpose-built to build airplanes. So that was not a General Motors plant that was converted to build airplanes. No, that was a plant that was built to build airplanes that was converted into building cars. But technically, since General Motors owned a good chunk of North America, you could argue that they were here when North American was here. But they officially took over the plant on November 5th of 1945. So that would be the first official time that they were present in Fairfax. Yeah.
And the other follow-up would be, you said the plant got started in 1940 or early 41?
In December 7th of 1940 was when it was announced, and they did the groundbreaking in early 41, before the war.
That's what I'm getting at, before the war, so technically, apparently they were prepared for the...
Okay, so every single, I won't say every single, so a lot of people don't realize this. The United States knew long before Pearl Harbor that they were getting into the war. Part of the reason, we always talk about, well, how did we gear up that quickly? Once Pearl Harbor happened, well, we didn't gear up that quickly. We started building our 1939, basically, was when the government first issued their contracts and said, look, we need to start gearing up. They used the Lend-Lease program as an excuse to start building all of this stuff. And then it was just a matter, because they knew it was just a matter of time. The government knew that we would eventually be involved in one sort or another in the World War II. And so it was just a matter of time. And Pearl Harbor just happened to be that trigger. Not inappropriately, quite dramatically actually. But that's all that was. But yeah, we knew. We knew. Any other questions?
Cruising altitude and airspeed?
Depends on the model. 25,000 feet is the ceiling. They actually had supercharged engines, so they actually could run boost in them. We don't run them with boost anymore because you'll blow them up. But they also had better gas back then. But so 25,000 feet is the ceiling, and depending on the model, we're going to say 300 miles per hour plus or minus max speed. The older models, a little plus. To give you kind of a segue, nowadays we don't fly them barely over 10,000 feet, and most of them cruise, depending on model, most of them cruise at about 190, give or take. The oldest, which is Miss Haps, she's a B-25, no number, she was the fourth one built, she still flies. She's also the lightest B-25 in the fleet, and she cruises a little over 200. But we don't push them any harder than that. You don't push a 75-year-old airplane. Not unless you can afford to put a new engine in it. You don't push them that hard. All right, anything else? Yeah?
I've been watching that series of Hitler, you
Yeah.
know, what happened to him. Anyway, his war production seemed a lot more advanced pre, even ours in 1940 or 39.
It
or whatever
was.
you're talking about.
Both
So how did
Japan
we
and
catch up
Germany.
so easily?
So, Pearl Harbor, on that day, the United States was 19th in the world in terms of strength of army and production and that kind of thing. 19th, so there were 19 countries, Germany and Japan were among them, that were a lot farther advanced than we were. Now, obviously, we came out on top because of many issues. But yeah, you are absolutely correct. Hitler was definitely a lot farther along than we were, and so was Japan. They just made some real stupid mistakes that we didn't. Anything else? 3,000 pounds, and then it just depends on how it's configured on the total numbers. You have bombs that are as small as 200 pounds. Now, obviously, you're not going to, haul that many of the 200 pounders. Probably around 18 of 200 pounders. You could probably, well, I don't know. That's just in the bomb bay. They actually did put wing racks on some of them later, and they could probably drop a few of those on. But you could do a single 500 pound, or a single 2,000 pound, or you could do different combinations of up to around 18 was the max that they could run. Sounds good to me. I just want to thank all of you guys so much. And then I am a not-for-profit volunteer organization, so I have to throw in the. If I come knocking on your door, if you love what I'm doing, let me know. So, because ultimately, I think more people need to know about this. So, any support that you guys can give to organizations like myself and others is greatly appreciated, because we're just out there trying to honor the people that deserve it. So, I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys.
Dan, thank you very much. I know that there's been some conversations between the Fairfax group and maybe the Wyandotte County Historical Group and all to help get that gate placed somewhere properly in the area and have some recognition of the legacy and history of the bomber plant. But thank you again, Dan, for coming. I think that takes care of our business for today. A couple quick reminders: check the website. There's always updates on there. About the luncheons and the speakers and all that. So again, our speaker next month is the Wyandotte County District Attorney, Mark Dupree. Following month, April, we'll have Mayor David Albee with us for the first time. Thanks everyone for coming. Special thanks again to Central Solutions and the Albee family. And I think at this point we normally do a little door prize, but everybody gets a door prize. Central Solutions to that. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll see if yours. Give us a call.
You're fine, go ahead, no, you're fine.